Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Would You Read It Challenge video for May 2026. The Would You Read It Challenge was a meme brought to BookTube by @2brody, and the purpose was to choose a variety of books by whatever metric you'd like, read and share the first sentence of each book with your audience, and then ask them which books they'd like to continue with. And so I was tagged a while ago, and then I just kept on doing it because I had a interesting backlog to use for my prompts for this. I'm using old ballots from the BookTube Prize. So the BookTube Prize was started by Robert Sheard back in 2019 as a way for the literary bookternet to come together to judge the best of literary fiction and nonfiction judged in English in the US the year before. So currently in 2026, we're actually reading 2025 releases. We're in the second of our rounds. The end of the quarterfinals, very much I'm looking down the barrel for my ballot about when I have to submit it and get things moving along to the semifinals. But I'm not allowed to talk about any of those books. I have to zip my lips, especially about my official ballot. But we've had several years of the BookTube Prize behind us now, so I figured I'd go ahead and tackle the fiction division, going ballot by ballot of the first round, the long list round, the Octofinals round, which is 8 ballots per year. And I've been diligently doing this, so right now I am up to year 2023, and it is fiction ballot D. So there are 6 books on this ballot, and I've actually read one of them myself just for fun. The other 5 are completely new to me, except that I have compiled their first few paragraphs. I do feel like with this collection of books in particular, I started out smaller and kept growing with what I'm sharing. I'm just trying to get to a point where, it feels like a sort of a distinctive end to the beginning of the story, because I decided not to do just one sentence, because that's not enough to grasp what's going on, and I'm trying to go for a couple paragraphs to about a page, so that's where I am. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share these first few paragraphs of each of the 6 books with you, then discuss my thoughts and invite your own. So without any further ado, let's start with book number 1. Preface. Towards the end of 2019, I received an email from a Mr. Martin Gray of Clacton-on-Sea. He had in his possession a series of notebooks written by his cousin that he thought might form the basis of an interesting book. I replied, thanking him, but suggested that the person best placed to make something of the material in question was Mr. Gray himself. He protested that he was no writer, and that he had not approached me randomly. He had, he explained, come across a blog post I had written about the forgotten 1960s psychotherapist Collins Braithwaite. The notebooks contained certain allegations about Braithwaite that he was sure would interest me. At this point, my curiosity was properly aroused. A few months earlier, I had come across a copy of Braithwaite's book, Untherapy, in the notorious chaotic Voltaire and Rousseau bookshop in Glasgow. Braithwaite had been a contemporary of R.D. Laing and something of an enfant terrible in the so-called anti-psychiatry movement of the 1960s. The book, a collection of case studies, was salacious, iconoclastic, and compelling. My newfound fascination with the author was not satisfied by the scant information on the internet, and I had been intrigued enough to visit the small archive at the University of Durham, 25 miles north of Braithwaite's hometown in Darlington. The archive consisted of a couple of cardboard boxes containing the heavily annotated manuscripts of Braithwaite's books, frequently adorned with obscene, though not unrealistic doodles, some newspaper clippings, and a small number of letters, mostly from Braithwaite's editor Edward Sears, and his sometimes lover, Zelda Ogilvy. As I pieced together the details of Braithwaite's extraordinary life, I began to contemplate writing his biography, an idea that met with little enthusiasm from my agent and publisher. Why would anyone, they ask, want to read about a foreign and disgraced character whose work had been out of print for decades? It was, I was forced to concede, a perfectly reasonable question. And that was from Case Study by Graham McCrae Burnett. Book 2. Ello, what's all this then? That's the voice of Cerberus, the savage mythical three-headed dog, one elo per head. In ancient myth, he guards the dead at the gates of the underworld to make sure none of them can leave. He's got very sharp teeth. He has the heads of a snake's rising off of his back like hackles, and he's talking in English music hall comedy language to what appears to be a good old British bobby, which is an old-fashioned word for a British policeman. This British policeman, though, is from right now. He's the latest corrupt upgrade, and he's crossed the river Styx and come to the entrance of the underworld to show each of Cerberus's heads some fun photos of himself and other uniforms, doing fun things like making V signs over and adding fun racist/sexist commentary to the pictures of bodies of real murdered people, which he's circulated on the Fun Police app he and his pals are using these days, in this land of Union Jack and the Lads in the year of our Lord 2021, in which this story, which stars me staring at nothing, sitting in my front room on the sofa one evening, imagining a meeting between some terrifying aspects of imagination and reality, takes place. Cerberus doesn't even raise an eyebrow, and he could, if he wants, raise 6 at once. Seen it all before. Let the bodies pile high, more the merrier in a country of people in mourning. Tragedy versus farce. And that was from Companion Piece by Ali Smith. Book 3. 1. One night I was in the dream jungle. It was not a dream, but a memory that jumped up in my sleep to usurp it. And in the dream memory is a girl. See the girl who live in the old termite hill. Her brothers 3, who live in a big hut, say that the hill looked like a rotting heart of a giant turned upside down. But she don't know what any of that mean. The girl, she is pressing her lips tight in the hill's hollow belly, the walls of red mud and rough to the touch. No windows unless you call a hole in a window, and if so, many windows popping all over and making the light cut across her body up and down and crossway, making the heat sneak in and stay, and making winds snake around the hollow. Termites long ago leave it, this hill. A place nobody would keep a dog, but look how this is where they keep her. 2 legs getting longer, but still 2 sticks. Head getting bigger, but chest still as flat as earth. She may be right at the age before her body set loose, but nobody bothered to count her years. Yet they mark it every summer, mark it with rage and grief. They, her brothers. That is how they mark her birth, oh. And at that time of year they feel malice come as a cloud upon them, for which she is to blame. So she is pressing her lips together because that is a firm thing, her lips set as tight as the knuckle she is squeezing. Resolve sets her face to match her mind. There, decided. She is going to flee, crawl out of this hole and run and never stop running. And if toe fall off, she will run on heel. And if heel fall off, she will run on knee. And if knee fall off, she will crawl. Like a baby going back to her mother, maybe. Her dead mother, who didn't live long enough to name her. And that was from Moon Witch Spider King by Marlon James. Book 4. Answers. You wake up with the answer to the question that everyone asks. The answer is yes, and the answer is just like here, but worse. That is all the insight you'll ever get. So you might as well go back to sleep. You were born without a heartbeat and kept alive in an incubator. And even as a fetus out of water, you knew what the Buddha sat under the trees to discover. It is better not to be reborn, better to never bother. Should have followed your gut and croaked in the box you were born into, but you didn't. So you quit each game they make you play. 2 weeks of chess, a month of Cub Scouts, 3 minutes in rugger. You left school with a hatred of teams and games and morons who valued them. You quit art class and insurance selling and master's degrees. Each a game that you couldn't be arsed playing. You dumped everyone who ever saw you naked, abandoned every cause you ever fought for, and did many things you can't tell anyone about. If you had a business card, this is what it would say. Molly Almeida, photographer, gambler, slut. If you had a gravestone, it would say, Molly Albert Cabalanda, 1955 to 1990. But you have neither, and you have no more chips left at this table. And you know now what others do not. You have the answers to the following questions. Is there life after death? What's it like? And that was from The 7 Moons of Molly Alameda by Shehan Karunatilaka. Book 5. Theo, Georgetown, Washington, D.C., 2019. The deceptively reductive forms of the artist's work belie the density of meaning forged by a bifurcated existence. These glyphs and ideograms signal to us from the crossroads, freedom and slavery, white and black, rural and urban. No, nup, that won't do. It reeked of PhD. This was meant to be read by normal people. Theo pressed the delete key and watched the letters march backward into oblivion. All that was left was the blinking cursor, tapping like an impatient finger. He sighed and looked away from its importuning. Through the window above his desk, he noticed that the elderly woman who lived in the shabby row house directly across the street was dragging a best French to the curb. As the metal legs screeched across the pavement, Clancy raised a startled head and jumped up, putting his front paws on the desk beside Theo's laptop. His immense ears, like radar dishes, twitched toward the noise. Together, Theo and the dog watched as she shoved the bench into the teetering ziggurat she'd assembled. Propped against it, a hand-lettered sign, "Free stuff." Theo wondered why she hadn't had a yard sale. Someone would have paid for that bench press, or even the Fox Moroccan footstool. When she brought out an armful of men's clothing, it occurred to Theo that the items in the pile must be her dead husband's things. Perhaps she just wanted to purge the house of every trace of him. And that was from Horse by Geraldine Brooks. And finally, book number 6. Intro. Brown brothers, sisters, moms, brown peers lived in a building with their neighbors downstairs, trying to stay alive and make all their stars align. Scant money in a wad, the rent on their mind. A nose above the tide, trying to stay afloat. On the edge, but I hope I won't fold. Instead, be like a pillar about to crumble, but stay concrete. While a man is on my shoulder, all I want is peace. My skin is getting scaly and my boss is trying to rail me. I have to go into work daily, saying feet don't yet fail me. Friendships, relationships, and 99 attacks on my character bills, and I'm black. You see my hurt grin, you see my makeup, you see the stub from my job. You see the rainbow pop up in my scars. Everybody got a story, everybody got a tale. Question is it despair or prevail? The rent manual. Days left, 10. Money you got, $0. Money you need, $350. The slip is going to come in the mail like it do every month, with the Lysol and the Save the Children envelope looking regular as hell. And it's going to have your name, Michelle A. Sutton, on it. And it's going to say balance. And it's going to say when the balance is due, 1st of the month. Read the slip to yourself. Scream shit, then stub your toe on the kitchen table. The man in 14C going to hit the wall. Hit the wall back. And that was from Stories from the Tenants Downstairs by Siddiq Fofana. All right, well, I'll start with the book I read, which is this one, by Horse by Geraldine Brooks. I actually got it signed a few years ago at the National Book Festival at the Library of Congress, and it's part of Geraldine Brooks's novels collection, obviously, and I think I've read all of her novels now. I've done a couple videos on that. This was... You know, she actually is inspired by, in a lot of historical fiction by a real event, which she then extrapolates on. And in this, she found she found out about this long, sort of buried in the attic, old photograph of a racing horse from antebellum times called Lexington. And then she started dipping into Lexington's past because he was not only a racing horse, but a really famous one from the antebellum South. And then, you know, it just automatically intersected with the realities that a lot of the jockeys, including Lexington's, would be enslaved people. And so she, from there, extrapolated, starting with her love of horses and this random, picture of the horse, into a broader story about the historical realities of art and racism and horse racing. And there are several different threads in different time periods. Obviously, Theo is our most, well, he is our most common day time period. He's a PhD, as you can tell, studying art, although we don't really get to see a lot of him before the narrative kind of yanks us away and just kind of sets the scene around him. And I don't know, as far as I can remember, technically this woman across the street doesn't have much bearing on the story. It's a little I guess unfortunate that we're yanked away in that direction at this point. And otherwise, I liked this book from what I can remember, but I also think, there's there's multiple timelines, not just two, and they didn't all work well. So, it's all, I don't think they all jived completely together. But in general, I do like this author. There's sort of a speculative feel, I think, to most of these other sections, even though I'm not sure all of them would be labeled as such. The one that definitely would, I think, is Moon Witch Spider King by Marlon James, maybe just especially because he said very directly that he was trying to write something that kind of was in response to Game of Thrones. I mean, or more like, using sort of the mythology of Africa the way that Martin did with sort of history in Europe. And so that's what he did. And this is actually the second book, I think, in his series. And I think both have been included on the BookTube Prize, which is very rare for, out in a, just straight up fantasy. And I guess it really shows, probably the reason, though, that he's on here is because he was first a literary writer. So he gets special, consideration. And I mean, I know there's some sort of, magical realist elements with the rest, a lot of the others, but I don't know, this one to me especially feels like we're getting very fantastical. We have a girl who, well, starting beyond the girl, we have a person having a prophetic, basically, dream about this girl. And obviously, I don't think this dream is meant to be fanciful. It's meant to be real, but also kind of mythological, like about a girl who's been imprisoned in this old termite hill, which the descriptions of this are just so compelling that I feel like maybe out of all these other books, I'd read this one just because of these compelling descriptions. And maybe reading it is difficult because Marlon James very purposely goes into his own vernacular that isn't grammatically correct, but it really, I think that the imagery is the most visceral here, and I get I guess the big sense of wanting to stick with this girl. Not that I think I will be reading any of these books, as I have enough on my TBR as it is, but I do think that, I think this is the last one of his fantasy novels he's published so far, but I think in general it made some sort of impression in the literary world. But, even moving up to, well, book two, a companion piece by Ali Smith, that also is fantastical in its way, although I don't, she isn't considered a fantasy writer, even though this is sort of a very similar setup, I'd say, where, a person is imagining this fantastical setup with Cerberus, the mythological three-headed dog who guards the underworld, except in this case he has to deal with sort of modern-day morally corrupt people like these policemen. So, I don't know. I guess, though, this, didn't necessarily stick with me that much. It just, well, first of all, obviously, there's no likable characters on the page, so, I don't know. There's obvious commentary here about the moral corruption of these policemen, but this isn't really the way I'd probably want to explore that issue. And then we have book number 4 is also fantastical, which is The Seven Moons of Molly Almeida, which is obviously about somebody who has been reincarnated. And I do think this is more interestingly put on the page, I suppose, because you can tell so much that this person is just sort of exhausted by being brought back to life, and that I guess this second life that they've been given mostly just makes them cynical, like nothing that they have put their minds to in this life has made an impact on their lives, and they mostly just seem to want to be left alone and not want to have to do anything, like anything having to do with a career or hobbies or anything like that. Yeah, there is that. And, I also, I was also struck by the last paragraph I read where it's like, well, you already have all the answers. And I'm like, well, if you already have all the answers, I guess in my own philosophy, I'd say, then there's nothing really worth living for anymore as it is. Okay. And then I guess I'll just go to the first and the last, which are the most, I think, realist in terms of fiction. The first book was Case Study, which actually, the preface reads like it's nonfiction, but I think it is actually fiction. I think this is a fictional biographer sort of prefacing how this research landed into his lap about this sort of iconoclastic anti-psychiatry figure of the 1960s, and why he's interested in writing his biography. And it's fine, but I guess I just like traditional fiction that isn't masquerading as nonfiction, that starts with an actual narrative story, and that's not what this is. This reads like a preface to a nonfiction biography, so I don't know. I mean, it's interesting, but it definitely wouldn't be my fave. And then finally, the final book, I believe, is a collection of short stories, which is stories from the tenants downstairs, and the intro in this case, I think, is really trying to draw a thematic overview with this poem. So it's about, black people, the black community living in this tenement, which obviously people are dealing with the realities of financial strain. And it comes to bear immediately in the beginning of this first story, the rent manual, where this woman, this POV character, is realizing that she has a bill to pay and she's got no money, and it's stressing her out, and she even swears and stubs the table, and it seems like that might lead into some altercation maybe with a neighbor perhaps. So it. From what I've read, it's, relatively standard. There's nothing too complex about it yet. In general, I think for anybody who, is interested in reading about the realities of, living in this sort of environment, this could be intriguing, but, it's nothing that sort of grabs you intrinsically, I guess, about the character yet. But, maybe we'll see. We could see what happens, but I probably won't see what happens because, as I said, I have too much reading that I have to do already, including reading for the BookTube Prize for my own judging now for what I'm reading officially right now. So with that, I'll say that about covers it for me now, although I'd love to hear your thoughts if you've read any of these books, or what your response is to these first few paragraphs that I've read aloud with you. We all have our personal burdens to bear, but yeah, we're reaching the end of May. And expect me back on this channel at the end of the month for my May book haul video, so that'll be a bit of fun. Stay tuned for that. Also, I will link to my Goodreads, the Goodreads pages for all of these books down below, and my review of Horse by Geraldine Brooks, and my playlist in case you'd like to see any of these other Would You Read It challenge videos I've done in the past. And in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.